Okay, this is the June 11th, 2021 meeting of the City of San Diego Commission on Police Practices Ad Hoc Transition Planning Committee. I'm Doug Case. I am the chair of the committee, and doing a roll call, I'll go through the Zoom list. And we have Brandon Hilpert, who is the chair of the commission. We have Diana Dent and Nancy Vaughn, who are members of the committee. We have our liaison with San Diegans for Justice, Kate Yavendetti. We have our outside counsel, Chris Cameron, and we have our executive director, Charmaine Mosley. Did I get everybody?
I just admitted Joe Craver.
Okay, good. And who wants to volunteer to take notes? Brandon, you haven't done it in a while.
As chair, don't I have other responsibilities like drafting notes? Yeah, I'll do it.
So, okay, and we have any public comment?
No public comment received.
Okay, then we can move on to updates. And the first one is the budget process. Charmaine sent out on Wednesday the memos from the IBA, which included the city council budget memos, as well as the final IBA report. And three of the council members, council member Montgomery Stepp, council member Marino, and Elo Rivera, all submitted a request for $25,000 to do a national search for the executive director, which is actually something we talked about at one time, and for whatever reason we didn't put into our budget, but probably is a good addition to the budget. It's not clear what the intent of their request is, whether it's the intent for. Well, it's not clear who they envision running the selection process and search process. But anyway, that was one of the mentions of the CPP in the memos, and the other one was from council member Raul Campillo, who wanted money put into the budget for a full year of general counsel. I did talk to him and explained that we had the same goal that he does of getting general counsel as soon as possible, but that we think that it's important that we have at least a new commission and probably a new executive director or a permanent executive director designated before we hire a general counsel. Plus, it takes a while to go through the process. We have in our budget 1 month of general counsel, which should be starting on June 1st. And that may be, frankly, a little bit ambitious. I did tell him it's my belief that I think that we can move things around in the budget. So if we have the opportunity of hiring a staff attorney first, we can transfer money from the contract outside counsel to a staff position. And he said he was going to confirm that during the budget discussions. And
Doug, let me ask you a question. Is that did I hear you correctly saying that they are allocating $25,000 for a search firm for executive director?
Yeah, I'm not sure whether it's for a search firm or just for the national search, because it could also include the cost of a travel of candidates to come and so forth. But that is what the request was, and all three of them put the same request in their memos, and so obviously they had collaborated on that request.
Okay, well that's a little short. The a search person or company charges a lot more than that. Even a local, they can go anywhere between 40 and 50,000. And then you don't get it. That doesn't even cost if you have to the extra cost of bringing people in. So that's just a comment. The second comment is on the budget. Do we have the authority to move money around?
That's my understanding, but that's something we're going to confirm. So the question was, can we, if decision is made to hire a staff attorney earlier than June 1, can we apply the money that we have designated for contract counsel to staff attorney? And Raul's going to confirm that we can, because that was part of his intent. And I don't know what because the council members obviously did not consult with us on making their request, and so I'm not sure whether where they came up with the $25,000 figure, or whether they're envisioning using a search firm, or whether they just assumed that would be the cost of the expenses of travel and other costs associated with doing a national search. So the city council budget hearing is on Monday, and so they may elaborate during their. My understanding is that those amounts were not put into the IBA's proposed budget, and so those will probably be amendments that are made from the floor. Okay. Yeah, the next item is staffing. And Charmaine, do you want to give an update of where we are with the 2 positions?
I can actually do that. She had to take an urgent call. So the first position was for the executive assistant. I think we talked about this last week. We did have some interviews. We've actually put out a job offer and she's accepted it. And so we're just working through that whole process there. So that's a great positive. For the admin aide 2, that's going to be the complaints coordinator. They'll also be handling budget related issues. We just finished our 5th interview about 15 minutes ago. So on that one, I think we have a bunch of good candidates. The 3 of us that were part of that committee, we need to go through and kind of finish our scoring documents and send those over. But on that one, I think probably within 4 weeks, we hopefully will be able to make a final determination and select a candidate. So we're getting there. We're working on getting some help for the commission, which will be much needed assistance.
Okay, and then the next position that we are scheduled to hire is the assistant executive director, who will be responsible for community engagement. And I sent out the draft that Patrick had worked on for the job description, and Charmaine, I think she copied everybody, made an additional suggestion to that. And then he also submitted a proposal for a selection process. Initially, we're talking about doing a kind of the equivalent of a roundtable for candidates, and his proposal included something a little bit different and more manageable, of having representatives from approximately 10 different community groups who would be invited to hear a presentation from the top candidates, and then they would provide feedback to the selection committee, and the selection committee would be a traditional selection committee. It would include Charmaine, the chair or the chair's designee. It didn't specify this, but I think for this position, we would want the community outreach chair to be on the selection committee, since they'd be working with that position directly, and one, possibly more community members. Charmaine indicated in her email that she was going to check with the city on that process. I know it's different than the way the city normally does it, but as Patrick and I noted, it's a fairly common way of doing selections for positions on colleges and universities, or at least at our 2 institutions. It's fairly common to have a community meeting where people who are interested could come and hear the candidates. Usually they were invited to do a presentation on a particular general topic related to the job that they were seeking. And there are feedback forms that are designed by human resources that provide feedback on the candidates. And then those are shared with the selection committee. And so we wanted to kind of emulate that process here. And so I guess we'll hear feedback from HR. We may get some pushback, in which case I think we had a pushback, and I think that's a really good idea to have the community input into the process. Anyway, let me open it up to others who have any feedback regarding either the job description or the selection process that Patrick recommended.
Well, I have a comment.
Okay.
I think that having the selection process that Patrick recommended is essential. I mean, this is a community outreach person. The community needs to be involved and know that they're involved in at least the initial selection. I also agree. I mean, I thought we had talked about earlier about not having an open forum because of people not wanting to necessarily let their current employers know that they're looking for a new position. So I think that this is not only better, but certainly better for the applicants as well.
Okay. Yeah, and so
And I guess that my other question is who would be choosing the panel? I mean, he's listed some organizations, and is that something that?
I think we can decide that down the road, probably.
Right.
I would
But
guess.
I mean, who is who? Like all of CPP or this committee or the outreach committee itself, or?
Well, I'll let Brandon weigh in, but I would think that the outreach committee would be the ones that would decide it.
Yeah, I agree. I think for this position, it's appropriate that outreach would deal with community related events. So yeah, I think it makes sense.
Okay, any other feedback? Okay, and I'm assuming if you don't have feedback that you are concurring with the proposal.
We are.
Okay, then let's move on. The implementation ordinance and permanent operating procedures, nothing new there. Hopefully we will be getting something next week to look at. And I propose that we maybe plan for an extended meeting next week to do that, and that be the only item on the agenda is looking at whatever proposal comes out from a D4.
I have a question, Doug. I was looking on the website today of city council meetings, and this is no longer on the website as a special meeting on June 24th. Is that, it used to be there and it's not there anymore? So are we really sure that this is still happening?
Well, that is a very good question. I wasn't aware of that.
Well, I wasn't either. We had a Women Occupy meeting last night and one of the other people mentioned that. And so I looked and it's not there unless I just missed it. But so I don't know if anybody else is here. I said I'd find out today because you folks are in the know.
Yeah, we need to check that.
Yes, I guess I can check with Chloe right after this meeting. Maybe they're envisioning a further delay. I don't know. But you're saying it was there and they took it down. Is that correct?
As I recall, I saw it there, like a month ago or something. And so it never occurred to me to look again, and it is not there. So I don't know if it's a website glitch or if it was intentional. But
Okay.
it seems to me that, I mean, all meetings, whether they're special or not special, need to be on the website, on the calendar.
Right. But I guess, there still is time to put it on. I mean, it has to be on the website. Yeah. And so maybe I'm not sure if it was on there and they took it off. I don't know what that means. I don't have, Charmaine is still not here. Is that correct?
I'm pulling up the website right now. Yeah, it looks like the only meeting listed for public safety, livable neighborhoods, is the June 16 meeting.
Do you have Chloe's cell number, Brandon?
I think I do.
Do you mind texting her and ask her if the special June 24th meeting is still scheduled?
Yeah, let me see if I can. Let me see if I can get a hold of her.
Okay, yeah, that's important to know. Thank you for bringing that to our attention, Kate. Nothing new on office space or on standing rules. And we're planning on the community roundtable discussion on the 21st. That's contingent on the implementation ordinance being available next week.
Hey, Charmaine, I just saw Charmaine's video pop up. I don't know if you were able to hear what we were talking about. Is there was some discussion or confusion about the PSLN meeting, that it's no longer on the website. Did it get canceled? Do you know?
Was it the special meeting, right, on the 24th?
Yeah.
They still have time to docket that item. So they will have, I believe, until Thursday to docket it.
Okay. From what we understand, it was initially on the website and then it got pulled off. And that's why we were just curious if it was still happening.
Oh, I don't know.
So,
I don't know.
okay, so the next item on the agenda is the legal counsel contract. I guess there are several issues there. One of them is, verifying that if we're able to hire a staff attorney earlier than June 1st, whether or not we can apply money toward that. The current contract expires on, I believe it's September the 13th, and it can be renewed for one more year. I asked the question of whether or not it could be renewed beyond that year, and looking at the contract, it would require an ordinance from the city council to expand it to beyond 5 years. And we have a couple of options. One is to, and I don't know whether or not there is an official document to extend the contract. All I've seen in the amendments was amending the contract to include the amount that the city council approved for the current fiscal year. But I haven't seen any where, I'm not sure there's any document showing that the contract has been extended from year to year. I just see the amendment that shows amending the amount that's available from each year.
I can check and let you know what I find. There might be something, I just haven't sent it over to you. Yeah.
And if there is, if we're going to be changing the scope of the contract, then we need to do a new RFP, and it needs to go out for bid. And we're going back for a second to the deadline. The 5 years would be up in September. So if for some reason we do not have a staff attorney hired by that date, then we're kind of in a pickle, because we can't extend the contract of our outside counsel, and we would be in a period of time without any legal counsel. And we don't really, yeah.
I'm sorry to interrupt. Are you talking about September of 2022 or 2021?
2022.
Yeah, 2022 is when
that's what I thought.
Yeah, 2022 is when the 5 years are up.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure that there wasn't like a big burning issue between now and September of this year, which is like tomorrow in contract times.
And
I'm glad you brought that up, because I thought it was 21.
Yeah,
I was pretty sure it was 2022, and I wasn't sure if Doug was giving us new information that he'd learned something different than that. So, okay, thanks.
Yeah, and we don't really know what they're envisioning in terms of the timing and selection process for the permanent executive director. We probably will know more once we see what is envisioned in the or is included in the implementation ordinance, assuming that it's addressed in the implementation ordinance. As I mentioned, our timeline, which is somewhat ambitious, has the person on board on June 1st. But if we have to wait for a permanent executive director and then go through a selection process after that person is on board, September of 2022 may be also ambitious. And so I don't know what the issue is there. And then in terms of the contract itself, and the current contract is fairly broad. It basically is providing legal counsel to the CRB in doing their functions. And I don't know whether we need an immediate amendment to change that to the CPP. And so I guess we're trying to decide how to proceed. I think one option that Bill Gersten suggested, if I read it correctly, is that we extend the contract, and I guess amend it to include the amount that the city council allocates, which we've requested $180,000, and then proceed with doing a RFP. And Chris can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think we can discontinue the current contract at any time. Is that correct?
That's correct. You can fire your attorney anytime you want, as Kate will tell you.
And
yeah, it's pretty simple. I'm sure you've got a provision in there that is a termination for convenience. And it may, I don't even know if it has a number of days or anything like that, but obviously we'll do whatever you need us to do. Or
we also cannot assign any work to the person. So they do work it's assigned, and so if you don't assign work, then it doesn't.
Correct. Exactly. Yeah, that's the ultimate control that you have.
So it seems to me that the easiest thing to do, if we're able to do it, and maybe we need to confirm this, is to extend the contract with Chris and do an RFP for an outside counsel that has more specific duties that were relating to the CPP and mentions the CPP most specifically and so forth. And then that would give us, that would solve the issue of the September 2020 drop deadline, because we would have a new outside counsel contract in process. And so I think unless there's other feedback, I think that's what we'll pursue, is see if we can do an extension of the current contract and then begin preparing an RFP, which our current counsel could apply for the new position as well, for the a new contract that is specifically tailored toward the CPP, because there are some additional duties that are associated with the CPP, including providing feedback, or providing legal assistance to investigators, assisting with developing investigation procedures, and maybe a whole list of things.
So can I add, because I was just reading Bill's email, and the first option seems like, yes, you can extend the contract, but there's going to be a budget limit of $25,000 unless we get council to approve it. We would have to take back.
I read that, but I want to check with them about that, because all the amendments say that it's the amount that the council approves for that year. And I'm not sure that he's aware that the council is recommending $180,000.
Okay.
But the previous contracts, said it was contingent upon the council budget, and then they amended it after the budget was approved and included the amount each year.
So then the scope will be the same, right?
If we change the scope, I don't think we can change the scope without doing a new RFP, is how I read Bill's. And so that's what I'm suggesting, is that we extend it and maybe find out if there's a specific document that's used to extend as opposed to amend, because all I see are the amendments and all the amendment.
And we've not, the amendments simply, and they may not have kind of done them as completely as they could, but the only documents that we've ever gotten each year is the amendment that basically implements the new budgeted amount from the council each year.
Right.
And so there's never really been an affirmative extension. I guess it's an extension by implication, because why would you put the new budgeted amount for the new fiscal year, if you were not extending the time frame as well?
Yeah, so that was my assumption as well, because I didn't see anything, and so I was assuming that there's not. So why don't we confirm, that we can do that, and then we can proceed after we get that confirmation. And then the other issue, which I'm not sure whether Charmaine has gotten clarification on, or firm clarification on, is whether work that is done prior to July 1 can be billed toward the $180,000 set aside for next year.
Doug, before we get that answer is, and I'm sorry, I'm going to have to drop off. I've got a doctor's appointment that I've got to do this afternoon. So I will have to drop off. Sorry.
That's okay. Oh, I thought you were going to ask a question, so you're just telling us you're dropping off. Okay.
Yes,
Okay. I thought you were going back to something else on the agenda. And so, Charmaine, did you get clarification on that?
Not yet.
Okay. And I asked that because I got a text from Charmaine earlier this week telling me and Brandon how much money we had left in the contract for this year, and it was what, like
1,900.
1,900.
It's probably less now. Because
Yeah, we've been kind of looking at that here as well, and I think it is probably just about run out. So
anyway, so hopefully the answer is yes. Otherwise, she's not going to be able to do anything for us until July 1.
I mean, I'm not going to leave you guys on the lurch, but we will need to push big projects out that require a lot of staff time, but obviously we'll continue to meet your needs.
Okay. Anyway, so those are all the updates. And so the next item on the agenda is the item we didn't get to last week that was on the agenda, which was the what we want to include in the memorandum of understanding between the commission and the police department. And I think this would be something that we would negotiate maybe even during the meet and confer process. I don't think we need to wait for that to be completed, but I think we need the implementation ordinance draft first, and then the second thing is we can begin working on the investigation procedures, and we can begin working on the memorandum of understanding. And so Charmaine sent out with the minutes what we had developed previously, and we were going to look it over to see whether or not it was inclusive of everything we wanted. And so let me just read it to you. It's fairly short. We wanted to include several items in there. Looks like there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 items. We wanted to include a schedule of items that the department would be required to provide to us within a certain timeline. And I included the agreement that was established in San Francisco between their department and their oversight body. And it's several pages long, and it basically includes everything that, every type of document that would be included in an investigation, and a procedure for if there's things that aren't on that list, what the procedure is for requesting that, and so forth. The second is confirming in writing that the internal affairs will not close out a case until they've given the commission an opportunity to look at it unless it's necessary to do so in order to meet the 1-year deadline for imposing discipline on a sustained finding, which is the current practice. And that is what they have, are continuing to do with the commission. But there's nothing in writing that says that, and we would like to have that in writing. It was an agreement that was made many years ago, I think with the city manager and the former CRB, but there's no written documentation that I can find that indicates that that's the case. And that's a really important thing, I think, to have documented, because it really gives the commission much more teeth in its review function. And then the next one was the complaint tracking process, which we discussed last week, and Brandon sent a memo to the chief based on our discussion from last week. And that's something we're planning on bringing up at our meeting with the chief, the cabinet and the chief on June 29th. The next one was conducting joint interviews with IA and the commission, investigators of Sdpd officers, which is something we think is important, that the initial interview should be with both bodies participating equally. And that probably will also be in the investigation procedures, and I'm sure it's going to be a hot topic during the meet and confer. Other things we included were the training opportunities available to the commissioners, which currently exist, and the department has been fairly generous in providing opportunity to go to the academy training, the menu training, doing ride-alongs, and just putting that in writing. And then opportunities that are provided to the police department via the commission, since we are also going to be doing our own training, to be able to allow for the department to participate in that. And then including deadlines for receiving completed IA investigations. So that, and I think the intent of that is so that the commission has ample time to review it. We've had some cases recently where there were sustained findings, or the commission recommended that a finding be sustained, and we were already up against the 1-year deadline. And then finally, to indicate that the department can review the results of the commission background checks, which makes it clear that the commission will be doing its own background checks. It won't be relying upon background checks conducted by the police department. And that'll be background checks for potential commissioners as well as potential staff. So is there anything that we haven't included in that list?
I just have one comment, and that is, I think that when the new commissioners are being interviewed, that they should be told that not only will the commission be conducting a background check, but that the police department will be reviewing it. I think it's important that they know that the police department is going to be seeing that as well. That doesn't have anything to do with this MOU, but if it's going to be part of your MOU, I think that the new commissioners need to know that, because some people might not want that.
So, okay. Any other discussion items?
Yeah, I have a question, Doug. Will our procedures for investigations for our normal CPP review process be included in this by reference or somehow?
For our investigations?
Yeah, not for our investigations, for our regular CPP review of IAs. reports and investigations. Because there are a lot of things that they do for us in the way of providing documents that we need.
See, and I think that's what we need to make sure we are included here, because this is separate from that. And so we have here the documents that are needed. But if there's other things specifically that we need to include, we need to add that to the list. What kind of things are you thinking of other than providing us with?
All those folders on the G drive and how it gets put in there and updated and who's responsible for what.
Okay.
You know, how much are they going to be able to help us format our reports or any of those things that make it where we're
Okay.
getting information from them that we need.
Okay, so it's the process of providing. So it's not just the schedule; it's the process for providing it.
Yes.
So maybe the.
I mean, it seems to be working fine right now without any agreement, but if we're going to write up details on this stuff, I think that ought to be there.
Yeah, definitely, because it may not continue into the future, and that may be good. It may be that they just give everything to our staff, and that our staff creates the folders for the teams and so forth. But the process of how they're going to share that information with the commission.
And I have another question. Is it clear in this MOU that this includes not just complaints made to the Sdpd or to CPP, but also the internal investigations with Sdpd?
Well, let's look and see. Where is that? Maintenance conducting. Actually,
So
it's
maybe just where it says
yeah.
complaints, you just want to
Yeah,
clarify
you're right.
what
Yes,
all those complaints are.
Yeah, or complaints and internal investigations.
Trying to pull up the memo we wrote. I'm almost positive I put in there the misconduct investigations as well.
Okay, but we had to add it to this list here since we're. Yeah, so the memo really addresses the fourth bullet point, but but that's one of several items that need to be included in the MOU.
Yeah, so I just pulled up the memo we sent last week. And yeah, the last bullet point says develop a new process in which CPP will receive officer misconduct cases, those that are not arising from community generated complaints.
Okay.
But yeah, we do need to put it in both spots.
Okay. Would it be appropriate to share this list then with the chief when we meet with him on the 29th and say these are the items that we think we envision including in a memorandum of understanding? We wouldn't negotiate any of it at that meeting, but maybe giving them a heads up of where.
Maybe that's a Chris question. Chris?
I'm sorry, I was writing an email to Doug and Charmaine because I don't have the document you guys are talking about. So I'm sorry, I wasn't paying attention at that moment. What was the question?
On the screen, sorry.
Okay. Yeah.
Terrific.
Okay. Yeah. Did you get the?
I got the memo that was sent to the chief.
Yeah. Well, did you get the agenda for this meeting?
I did. Oh.
Yeah.
And there, I see that it's down lower in there.
Yeah, it's down lower. Yeah.
So much. I wasn't sure if there was more than that because I captured the 8 issues, but you seem to be referring to something that maybe expanded them somewhat, but maybe I'm just mistaken.
No, I think these are the issues there. And then,
Gotcha.
and then below that is the example from the San Francisco department for the first item there.
Gotcha. All right,
Okay.
I do have that.
Okay. And then when the question was raised, would it be appropriate to provide this list of items to the chief when we meet with him on the 29th of this month, not to negotiate items there, but saying this is a list of items we've come up with that we think need to be included in an MOU.
That
Maybe
needs to be
even-
addressed.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
maybe even have them and ask them for any additional items they think need to be addressed.
Right, there may be things that come from their side that they want the commission to consider. I guess the only thing I would ask you is from your own process internally, we're here at the transition committee, have these gone to the full commission, that you feel comfortable that you can speak for the commission, that these are the sort of 8 preliminary, expanded issues that you're going to want to have included in the MOU?
I think so, because actually the full commission did approve the document that this comes from.
Okay. All
And
right.
we're adding a couple of small amendments to it, but I think that we can speak on behalf of the commission. on
Yeah,
that.
and I think this is early and preliminary. I mean, we're not really down to having specific provisions for each of these. And I think it's just probably a show of good faith and, what you think you're going to be bringing to the PD at this point in time.
Right, because
I don't
the
see-
MOU is a
Moreover, we've
two-sided
got-
thing.
Right.
And-
And this
and
is a
it-
public meeting. So if you think about it, this is out there.
And, but we want it to be a collaborative process. And so,
Sure.
certainly if we, give them, this is what we think needs to be included, and ask them for any additional items that they think need to be put on the table. We're involving them in the process. And I think if we do that, rather than come to them later and with a list of demands, I'm saying this is what we need to be in an MOU, we probably will get a better response.
I have another question, Doug.
Okay.
What about their famous informal investigations that we've heard so much about and recently seen interviewers who are doing complaint intake lean on the complainants to use that process? What about those? I've never seen one of those letters that I can remember, but what about that?
Did we, remind me, Brandon, did we address that in the memo?
Don't believe we officially brought up the informal, but I think the way that the measure and the charter amendment was written, we need to be able to get access to all complaints as they come in. So that would include informal. So now, would we have the full documents? No, but I mean, if that's going into internal affairs, or I'm sorry, IA Pro, or even Blue Team, whatever, I would say we should still be getting that information.
I don't think it does, Brandon. I think this is their way of avoiding that.
Okay, then maybe we ought to put on their access to documentation regarding informal complaints.
I would like to see it, because I think we really need to be specific about it.
So the way, and again, I just pulled it up again. So that first bullet point that we have, and we propose this takes effect July 1, says Sdpd shall transmit all complaints received by the department to CPP within 2 business days. We're not specifying a category. We're not specifying formal, informal. We're just saying all complaints. So I think the fact that that's a little bit more broad, I think implies we get copies of everything. Now, whether that means they need to start adding stuff if they're not doing it now, we'll find a way to make that work. But we can bring that up and talk to them about that. But I would say that's everything. And if a complainant then decides to make that become an informal complaint, fine. But we still get the information that there was a complaint that was lodged.
Okay, good luck.
Okay, but I think to Nancy's point, adding something along the lines of access to documentation regarding informal complaints.
Please.
So that we can have documentation that the complainant did indeed not request a formal complaint. And so whatever documentation they have, which they do have documentation, but we don't see that documentation. And that just raised another issue, is that we want to have our performance auditor have access to basically all PD records to be able to, determine, reporting requirements to do studies of different issues and so forth. And I think, you know, we requested it that be included in the implementation ordinance. Whether it is or not, we'll see shortly. But maybe the process for, maybe just keep it general here for the time being. Process for the CPP's performance auditor to request data from the department, and then we can get into more detail later. How does that sound?
I would change, I don't think we should say request, because request means they could say no.
Or the
I would say to
access.
to access or acquire.
Yeah, maybe just spit access, or maybe access or acquire. How about that? Like you just said, okay.
Yeah.
A data. Let me just say Sdpd data.
Yeah.
And then we can define that further down the road. You know, because I'm envisioning, you know, that the new commission will have a lot of power to review the operations of the department. So for example, the hot item currently is pretext stops. You know, that the performance auditor could ask for documentation on all pretext stops and whatever. Although they don't put into they don't identify in their system that something is a pretext stop, so we have to request it a different way. But in other words, we could do a study of pretext stops. And a lot of the data that we would be requesting would be information that's publicly available, but we don't want to have to go through a public records request in order to get data from the department. And we also want data that may not be publicly available. So, okay, anything else on that item? Okay, then I will make those additions, and should we just bring copies to the meeting on the 29th?
Yeah.
Okay. So how are we doing on time wise? It's 12:49. The next item you wanted to discuss was how we're going to deal with internal complaints. And we haven't really given a lot of thought to it. Do we want to handle it the same way that we handle complaints? So what we're talking about here is we will have the ability, once the implementation ordinance is approved, to review all misconduct investigations, which includes the internal investigations. And we don't know what they look like. I assume that they're very similar to, or maybe identical, I don't know, to the IA investigations of complaints. And so it would seem to me that we would want to use a very similar process for reviewing the results of their internal investigations as we do for their complaint investigations. Any thoughts on that?
Well, I think I would agree with you, Doug. I think we probably should do something similar to our existing process. My hunch is that if it's an internal misconduct, chances are there's going to be a lot more sustained related findings, just because of the nature of what it is or could be, or how they've been alerted to concerns. But yeah, I think we would just need to have access to all of the same things we'd get for all of our current review files.
Do you mind asking the captain, Brandon, what their internal investigations look like? I mean, do they do investigation reports that are similar or identical to the investigation reports that we see for complaints? And if not, how do they differ?
Yeah, I'll ask.
We've never seen it before, and so I guess maybe we need to confirm that. But it seems like with nobody else picking up, there's a consensus that we should treat them in a similar fashion. Okay. Well, actually, it occurs to me that I was looking at our next item of new business. It says procedures for making recommendations to Sdpd and requirements for Sdpd response. And maybe that ought to be also be included in the memorandum of understanding.
Jermaine, can you scroll up on the agenda real quick, just so we can all look at the same thing?
Yeah, so our next item of business is be there. And maybe it just occurred to me that maybe we ought to simply add that to our MOU.
Yeah, I think
And
so.
what I'm thinking is that we ought to require a written response and require it within a certain time frame. And I don't know what that time frame would be, and it may vary according to like a policy recommendation may require more time than a discipline recommendation.
I mean, my thought, I mean, not to jump ahead, sorry. I think I'm a big fan of 30 days. It's soon enough that it won't get forgotten. We've put out a memo, or, you know, once we've made a recommendation, it's out there. I think sometimes, you know, if we say you have 90 days to reply, they're going to probably reply back on day 87. And I think sometimes when in the past, we've made recommendations, there are recommendations that are usually fairly simple. And I think we get responses pretty late, I think, for what it is. So I would say, let's start with the 30 days. And then based on what their feedback is, I mean, there could be valid reasons, like if we're making certain policy recommendations, like some of the protest policy recommendations we made, there's probably valid reasons why some of them, they might need more than 30 days to respond, but I think they could still respond and say, we're looking at, you know, X, Y, and Z, and on this one, we need more time to research. We'll get back to you, you know, in another 30 days or whatever. I think that's still a response. We just need to make sure we follow up if we haven't heard complete answers to our questions. But I think 30 days is good.
Yeah, and I think we can put in the MOU, if we agree with 30 days, which I think is reasonable too. We could say that the department can request additional time if, you know, if necessary, to do additional research or whatever.
I have another question.
Go ahead.
When you say making recommendations to Sdpd, does that include our recommendations to change findings or to add allegations to reports or that kind of thing too? Are we going there?
Not really. What I was thinking in this item were the things that we normally make recommendations, like policy recommendations, which is, you know, specifically in the Measure B, and
Right.
discipline recommendations. Maybe we ought to just put maybe ought to be specific there in saying policy and discipline recommendations.
So are you envisioning, Doug, that we'll continue to have closed meetings with IA present like we do now going forward, like that will continue to be the process? So those recommendations on findings and things would be brought up in our closed meetings. Is that still going to be true?
It's still going to be true. Now, our investigations will be a little bit different, and we haven't developed our investigation procedures yet. But you're asking me how I envision, and the permanent commissioners may choose a different, you know,
Right.
way of doing it. And I can't predict how future, you know, commissioners may choose to do it, but I'm envisioning a similar process.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Well,
Yes.
I have a question, because I don't understand then why you're excluding any other recommendations that you make. If you're just talking about discipline, if Nancy's talking about adding allegations or, you know, other, I mean, you make all those kind of recommendations. Why would you exclude those from this timeline and procedure?
I don't know. Good question.
Or did I misunderstand something? I mean,
Good
Good point, Kate.
I think if I can jump in real quick, I think there's probably two different ways you want to look at it. I think if we're sending a formal policy or discipline recommendation, that's going to come in the form of a memo from CPP. Sometimes when we've asked for changes of findings, I mean, it's still kind of written, but it's not quite as formal. Usually a team will go back and they'll talk to the investigating sergeant and say, hey, we reviewed allegation 1.
Right.
You said it was unfounded. We think it should be not sustained, or, you know, whatever. We'll like send that over to them, but it's not quite as formal of a process. We don't send them a memo. And usually what they'll do is, you know, they will still write something up and they'll respond back and they'll send that to the team. So I think as things change, because obviously the board did it differently than the commission will do it going forward. And so I think we probably need a little bit of flexibility to kind of figure out what's working, especially if we're in completely different buildings. Because, you know, what I've done personally is I've gone and I've actually walked down the hall and I've spoken to the investigating sergeant and said, hey, I have concerns about this. And then we'll sit down and we'll talk about that. So it's not always as formal. Now that we're not going to be going into internal affairs at some point, it's going to probably have to be, just by nature, a more formal process.
So Brandon, what I'm thinking about is if what we've been talking about is how we negotiate during our review process. And that's fine. We talk to them like you're saying, which is my favorite way of talking to them face to face, and tell them why we think an allegation should be added or a finding changed. But if we get to the point where we report in a closed meeting and there's a disagreement that the board supports, then maybe that's where we would be writing a memo that would fall under this procedure, where we would write that memo recommending that a finding be changed, that would get to be part of this procedure and make it more formal. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so maybe making formal recommendations, and then taking out, maybe just adding the word formal recommendations.
Okay,
So procedure for making formal recommendations to the department and requirements. I was also going to put including deadline for Sdpd response.
okay, thank you.
And Brandon's frozen on my screen. I'm not sure whether he's completely frozen.
I can still hear. Can you guys hear me?
And well, you're no longer frozen, but you were
Okay.
your face was frozen with your mouth open. So
Oh, that's wonderful.
okay. Well, our next, Brandon, you texted Chloe.
I haven't heard back from her yet.
Okay.
I shot her an email actually, because I don't have her number. I don't have her city desk number.
Okay. Okay. But for the time being, let's assume we're going to have the implementation ordinance at the time that they told us they would. And I'm not sure. Oh, hopefully they haven't changed their plans without telling us, but I don't know.
Well, and Doug, I could be totally misremembering that I saw it. And maybe I just expected to see it. So,
okay.
you know, don't hold me to that.
Okay.
but I was just surprised that it wasn't there when I looked today.
Okay. You know, and actually thinking about it, I don't think I saw it there when I looked. So maybe they never put it there. Okay. Let's proceed with the assumption that what they told us was their plan is still the plan. And so our agenda for next week will be an extended meeting to review the implementation ordinance. And then
Can I ask a question about something different?
Sure.
Because if we're talking about other priorities, what is the status of putting cases up on the website of that next level of transparency? I know that you've been talking about it for a long time, but I haven't been to all your meetings, so I didn't know what was going on there.
You know, Brandon just included that in his memo. Why don't you go ahead and address that?
Yeah, I was gonna say, typically what I do is once a month, I'll send all the commissioners an email of kind of status updates. A lot of the teams are working on doing those case summaries. What I'd like to do, and I have this on the agenda for our next open meeting, is I'd like to try to get everything done by the end of this fiscal year. So sometime I would love it to be early, say July or August of the beginning of the new fiscal year, to be able to put all those up for at least this current fiscal year. So we're going to put that up as an agenda item for our next open meeting, to be able to try to get those addressed. I know some teams have them done, some teams are still working on them, but we're going to try to get those all finished. So we'll talk about that again.
So don't you anticipate that the next open meeting will be primarily discussing the ordinance? Or do you think you'll have,
Yeah, but keep in mind,
isn't the next open meeting Tuesday and the ordinance, or a week from Tuesday, and the ordinance supposed to be out a few days before that? But in any event, I guess I'll see what
Yeah.
your agenda is. Okay.
yeah, well, and keep in mind, Brandon, that there's two, additional steps. One is that
Right.
our legal counsel has to review it,
Yeah.
and the department has to review it before to make sure that it's compliant with the
Right.
legal
Okay.
requirements. But we need to get we need to make sure all of our reports, all of our redacted summaries are up to date. And
Right.
then,
And,
but
and
there may be a delay before we can make it publicly available because it has to go through that review process. Yes, Charmaine?
yes, I have to review it as well.
And,
The email I sent out to all of our commissioners was making sure that at least the teams were done with their component of that. Because obviously that's the first step, and then we need to go through those other review process as well. But I would like to get them up sooner rather than later, because I know that is an important part of transparency, and people would like to be able to see, what types of cases we're reviewing and how are those cases being resolved. So it's something we're working on it. And I know people don't like to hear we're working on it, but we're going to try to see what we can do to get it done as fast as possible and get it up as quickly as we can.
It's just one of the questions I get a lot. So,
Well,
now I
Yeah.
have a we're working on it answer.
yeah, can you put it on the chair's report for the next open meeting? So the community knows
Yeah,
that we're.
I was actually going to have that as an agenda item for something for us to discuss on the next meeting. So
Perfect. Okay, any other items we want to prioritize for future meetings?
I just have a comment on the last one, because I've been writing those things, but not for every report that we do. And I've never had one reviewed, and I would love for Charmaine and Chris to look at least one that our team has written, just to see if we're on the right track. I mean, we could find out very quickly that we've overstepped our limitations with these reports. I don't want to find that, but I sure would love to have a reading sooner rather than later, Brandon.
I was gonna add,
someone from CPP leadership at this time, just because of all the interviews and the workload and lack of resources, that someone from leadership actually read the summaries and move them forward. Then we also got to think about, as far as outside counsel budget, we need to make sure that all of those ducks are in a row at this point.
Yes. Yeah,
They're-
and
They're pretty short. That's the good news.
yeah, and I was going to say, I mean, to the extent, and I want to be respectful of the enormous burdens that are placed on staff right now and doing a lot of different things. But, as you get those ready, don't feel like you have to have them all before you send them to us. We'd be happy to review as they come along, but I'm sure Charmaine should look at them first.
Okay, thank you.
what I'll do is I'll go through, I'll create a list of all the cases we need, and I'll maybe even create a spreadsheet of, that way we can all check off, Charmaine's reviewed it, outside counsel's reviewed it, departments reviewed it, and at least we can kind of see where we are when those dates are done. So I will add that to my short list of things to do. And I'll hopefully, I'll have that done before our open meeting.
We can probably give Chris access to the Google Drive where those are stored as well.
Yeah, certainly.
okay, so any additions to the discussion items or future agendas? Right, I think once we get the implementation ordinance, we probably will want to spend more time at these meetings talking about the investigation procedures themselves. So maybe I ought to put under the future items, put investigation procedures. Okay, and then I put on the agenda the perhaps changing the June 25th meeting, but I did that because I got a jury summons for that day. But I've gone ahead and changed my start date for jury service, primarily because I didn't want to risk not being available for the Chiefs meeting on the 29th. So I moved it to later in August. And so why don't we just plan on, our next meeting is going to be on the 18th, which is next Friday, and we're planning on a 2-hour meeting for that. And then our 25th meeting, we're not going to change unless somebody else has a request to change it. Okay.
Yeah, I actually have to go. I guess are at the end, but I've got a hearing starting at 1:30, so I have to go.
I think we're adjourning. And so
Perfect.
we are done unless somebody else has anything else. So thanks, everybody.
All right, thanks, guys.
All right, have a good weekend.
You too.